The waiter sprinkled salt on Keanu Reeves' sleeve, mocked him, but when Salt Bae walked out of the kitchen, everyone realized they just mocked the wrong legend. And what came next, no one in that room will ever forget. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching this from. Let's see how far this story travels. The heavy, gold-trimmed doors of Nuzet Steakhouse slid open with a hiss of air conditioning and ego. The scent of seared wagyu and smoked rosemary hit like a signature cologne, instantly signaling exclusivity. Inside, flashes of camera phones illuminated the dimly lit dining room, while the clink of crystal glasses painted an atmosphere where excess wasn't merely celebrated, it was the dress code. It was a place where people didn't just dine, they performed, curating their personas as meticulously as the chefs plated their dishes. And then he walked in, Keanu Reeves. No entourage trailed behind him, no reservation preceded his arrival, and certainly no designer tuxedo adorned his frame. Instead, he wore a plain black t-shirt, faded jeans, and a cap pulled low over thoughtful eyes. Dust still clung to the hem of his boots, remnants of the sidewalk outside, the same sidewalk this restaurant pretended didn't exist. Heads turned. Conversations dipped. A woman in a sequin dress gave him a once-over and scoffed into her champagne flute. Nearby, a group of influencers at the bar zoomed in their phone cameras, not in admiration, but for the ridicule they hoped to post online. Keanu paused just inside the threshold. The maitre d', too busy handing menus to a couple wearing matching Rolexes, didn't acknowledge him. Undeterred, Keanu stepped forward anyway. His presence was calm, almost quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of opulence around him. A waiter with slicked-back hair and a suit tailored just an inch too tight intercepted him. Damien, his name tag gleamed with the same arrogance as his smile. "Good evening," Damien said, looking Keanu up and down as though sizing up a poorly wrapped gift. "Are you lost?" Keanu met his gaze, his voice steady. "Just looking for dinner." Damien's smile tightened. Of course, walk-ins are no problem at all. But it was a problem. A layered condescension that slid under the skin like a blade dipped in sugar. Damien tapped something into his iPad and gestured toward the side of the room, away from the open grill, away from the velvet booths, somewhere near the bar, loud, cramped, and bathed in the blue light of vodka bottles. "This way, sir." Keanu followed without protest, but as he passed, he caught glances, not of recognition, but mockery. The kind that didn't laugh out loud but curled lips in corners and whispered behind napkins. At a nearby table, a young man in a silk jacket leaned toward his date and whispered, "Is that John Wick or a DoorDash driver?" Laughter followed. Damien smiled, clearly enjoying being in on the joke. Keanu sat alone, no menu yet, no water, no performance of the famed Salt Bae flourish, just the throb of bass-heavy music and the distant sizzle of steaks he wouldn't be offered. He looked around not to judge but to absorb. He wasn't there to make a scene, but the scene was about to make itself. By the end of the night, every single person in that restaurant would know exactly who he was, and regret ever looking at him and seeing only a man in jeans. Damien prided himself on spotting who mattered. It was an art, really. The cut of a jacket, the weight of a watch, the way someone held a wine glass, these were his tools of judgment. He didn't serve just food, he served status. And Keanu Reeves, in his dusty boots and bargain bin wardrobe, didn't look like he belonged anywhere near the gold-draped booths of Nuzet. As Damien approached Keanu's table, his smile was stretched, polished, but hollow, like chrome over rust. "Damien, I'll be your server tonight," he said, placing a single leather-bound menu on the table. It was thinner than the ones he gave other tables. "We offer a curated experience here at Nuzet. For guests like yourself, we recommend our essential selection, a more approachable range of dishes." Keanu looked down at the menu. No tomahawk, no wagyu gold, no signature steaks shimmering with edible gold leaf. Just burgers, salads, and a single line that read, "Chef's Daily Special, Market Price." He didn't say anything. "Not yet," Damien continued, his voice dipped in false warmth. "If you're interested in our specialty cuts, we do require advanced notice and a profile on file. You understand, it helps us keep the experience exclusive." Keanu finally glanced up, his expression unreadable. I see. Damien took it as submission. He moved on to the wine list, or rather, not the wine list. A smaller laminated card with 3 options: red, white, and sparkling. No vintages, no regions, just prices. I'll give you a moment, Damien said, stepping back with the poise of a man who thought he had just dodged a bullet of inconvenience. Across the room, another server wheeled out a sizzling, gold-plated tomahawk steak to a group of influencers. Damien passed by, offering them his best smile and even performing a mock Salt Bae sprinkle with his fingers, drawing laughter and a few camera flashes. But when he returned to Keanu's table, the smile faltered. Keanu had placed the limited menu aside. His gaze was calm but direct. I'd like the tomahawk gold, he said. Rare. Damien blinked, then laughed softly as if indulging a child. Sir, he said, leaning in slightly, that dish is $1,500 and quite theatrical. Are you sure? Keanu didn't flinch. I am. Damien hesitated. There it was again, that strange stillness, that quiet confidence that didn't match the outfit. For a moment, Damien questioned himself. Then he recovered, pushing a thin smile onto his face. Very well. I'll check with the kitchen, though it may not be available tonight. He turned, annoyed. Keanu wasn't playing along. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't embarrassed. And that bothered Damien more than he could admit because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. The poor man asks too much. The waiter smiles condescendingly. The man shrinks, defeated. But Keanu just sat there, like a storm cloud that hadn't decided where to break. Behind the glass wall of the open kitchen, flames licked up into the air as a chef flambéed a slab of Kobe beef. The room buzzed with the low hum of opulent soft jazz filtered through hidden speakers, interwoven with the rhythmic clinks of fine cutlery and champagne flutes. But at table 14, the mood was different. Keanu sat in stillness. He hadn't touched the glass of water finally delivered after 10 minutes. His fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the table, not out of impatience, but rhythm, measured like the ticking of a clock before a detonation. At a booth nearby, 2 men in velvet blazers and overstarched collars chuckled, watching Damien pass by. Is he serious? One muttered. Ordering the gold tomahawk dressed like that? The other sipped from a coupe of Dom Perignon. Maybe he thought this was a steakhouse chain, not Newsit. The murmur spread like perfume in the air, subtle, cloying, and unmistakable. Even the bartender paused mid-pour to get a better look at the man who dared to ask for royalty-level steak in a black tee and faded denim. Damien returned to the table, jaw tense, trying to hold his smile together like a broken mask. He bent slightly at the waist. Sir, I've spoken with the kitchen. Unfortunately, the tomahawk gold is in limited supply tonight. Priority is given to guests with reservations and loyalty credentials. Keanu's eyes met his with that same unreadable calm. You mean it's not available to me? It wasn't a question but a fact. Damien's smirk twitched. Of course not. I didn't say that. You didn't need to. Around them, forks slowed. Conversations stuttered. A woman dressed in diamonds glanced up from her plate of caviar, sensing tension the way wolves smell rain. Damien's voice dropped to a near whisper. Look, I'm trying to save you the embarrassment. This isn't the kind of place where people just walk in. You mean people who don't look the part? Damien leaned in, letting his voice turn just sharp enough to cut. I mean people who can't pay the bill they're pretending to order. A silence dropped like a curtain between them. And then Keanu did something that made Damien step back, uncertain. He smiled, just a small one, a flicker at the corner of his mouth, like he'd seen this scene before, like he knew exactly how it ended, and it wasn't going to favor Damien. You're sure the steak isn't available? Keanu asked. Positive, Damien snapped, almost too quickly. Then maybe I'll just wait until it is. His voice wasn't defiant, it was inevitable, like gravity. Suddenly all the stares, all the mockery, all the whispered jokes, none of it seemed to touch him. Because Keanu Reeves wasn't there to prove he belonged. He was there to remind them that some people don't need to prove anything at all. Damien drifted between tables like a stage actor, smiling broadly at influencers and entrepreneurs who posted more than they tasted. He refilled champagne flutes, made jokes about truffle oil, posed for a selfie with a TikTok chef, all the while keeping one eye on table 14. Keanu hadn't moved. He sat there, shoulders relaxed, eyes scanning the room, not searching, not judging, just watching. Every so often, he glanced toward the open kitchen, where the real Salt Bae had yet to appear. Customers whispered about his possible arrival, phones at the ready in case the legendary flourish of salt made its entrance. Damien rolled his eyes. He had done his part. The steak wasn't available. The man would eventually get the hint, pay for his water, and leave. And yet, Keanu remained unbothered, unmoved, like a stone in a stream that refused to erode. By the time 20 minutes had passed, Damien's patience had frayed like the hem of a cheap napkin. He sauntered back to the table, dropping a small silver dish with a soft clink. "Complimentary bread," he said flatly, turning on his heel without waiting for thanks. Keanu looked down at the bread, cold, unbuttered, and clearly taken from the back of the kitchen. He made no comment. He didn't touch it. At a nearby table, a middle-aged couple began whispering. "I think that's him," the woman said. "The actor?" She nodded. "He was in The Matrix, and that one with the dog." Her husband leaned closer. "John Wick." The woman bit her lip, eyes widening. "It is him. I'm sure of it." They weren't the only ones. Murmurs started to spread. A waiter at the bar looked up from polishing glasses. A hostess near the entrance startled, narrowing her eyes. But Damien refused to acknowledge it. He returned again, this time with a wine list, the real one, thick as a hardcover novel, edged in gold. "Perhaps something to drink while you wait?" he offered, the words thick with sarcasm. Keanu flipped it open slowly, his eyes dancing across names. Opus 1, Chateau Margaux, Lafite Rothschild. Without looking up, he said, "What pairs well with disappointment?" Damien's face froze. A beat of silence passed. Then he laughed, short and hollow. "You're full of surprises, sir." "You have no idea," Keanu replied gently, closing the wine list. Just then, a waiter from another section approached Damien, whispering in his ear with urgency. Damien waved him off. "Handle it yourself." The waiter hesitated. "It's about table 14. Damien turned sharply. "What about it?" The waiter glanced toward Keanu. A guest at table 6 recognized him. Said he's Keanu Reeves. Damien's eyes narrowed, but he dismissed it with a scoff. If he's really Keanu Reeves, why wouldn't he say so? The other waiter didn't answer, just gave Damien a look, one that said, "Maybe you're not the smartest man in the room anymore." But Damien didn't care, not yet. Because the worst kind of fire isn't the one that erupts. It's the one that smolders quietly before consuming everything. The tension that simmered in the air finally boiled over with the shrill scrape of a chair. Damien approached table 14, clutching a small silver dish with a flourish that was equal parts mockery and spectacle. His smile was back, but it had sharpened, brittle as glass. "Still waiting, sir?" he said, a bit too loudly, ensuring half the room turned their heads. Keanu looked up, unbothered. His calm was a quiet defiance against the mounting storm of humiliation swirling around him. Damien set the dish down with a theatrical gesture and, almost in slow motion, pulled a tiny golden packet of Malden salt from his apron. He ripped it open, pinched the crystals, and with an exaggerated flick of the wrist, scattered them across the untouched bread, letting several grains spray onto the table and Keanu's sleeve. He did it just like Salt Bae, but where the real master's movements were elegant, Damien's were laced with spite. The gesture, intended as a performance, landed as a public insult. A ripple of laughter echoed from the next table. Someone pulled out a phone. A woman in a red dress muttered, "Guess you need a suit for the real salt around here." Her partner snickered. Damien grinned wide, playing to his audience. "You know, sir, some people come here just for the show," he sneered, dusting his fingers with a flourish. "But not everyone's cut out for gold." Keanu looked down at the spilled salt, then slowly brushed the grains off his sleeve with careful, deliberate movements. His gaze was steady when it met Damien's. "That's not how you salt a steak," Keanu said, his voice low but clear. Or a man. For a moment, silence pulled around the table. Damien's bravado wavered, just a flicker, but the moment was quickly swept aside by more laughter, the kind that bites and lingers. Undeterred, Keanu reached for his water, took a sip, and placed the glass down with a composure that made the petty humiliation look even smaller by comparison. From across the room, a customer with a sharp eye for celebrity snapped another covert photo. The news was already rippling through the restaurant's digital veins. Rumors of Keanu Reeves disrespected at Salt Bays were finding their way onto social media. Damien leaned in, his voice lower, meant only for Keanu's ears. Maybe next time, try somewhere less exclusive. Keanu's reply was almost a whisper. Maybe next time, try respect. The waiter straightened, annoyance leaking through his mask of confidence. He was losing control of the story, but he didn't know it yet. As he stalked off, victorious in his own mind, Keanu sat back, his eyes never leaving Damien's retreating figure. He didn't need to fight back, not yet. Because sometimes, the universe has a way of serving its own justice. The scent of charred rosemary drifted through the air, but no one noticed anymore. What had begun as quiet ridicule had curdled into something heavier, an atmosphere thick with discomfort and unspoken tension. The diners at Newsit weren't laughing now. They were watching. All eyes returned again and again to table 14 and the man who hadn't flinched. Keanu Reeves still sat alone, his posture relaxed but his presence suddenly magnetic, like a fuse that had been lit but hadn't yet reached the powder. Across the room, phones hovered just inches above tabletops, angled discreetly. Murmurs crept between wine glasses. That's really him, right? I saw the video. He didn't even react. The waiter threw salt at him. Actual salt. Yet Damien strutted through the restaurant as if the room belonged to him, basking in the artificial warmth of shallow laughter from one or two loyal regulars. But something had shifted. The grins were thinner, the chuckles shorter. The support he thought was unwavering now teetered on the edge. He stopped near the bar, exchanging a smug glance with a manager, a young man in a crisp suit with slicked back hair who had clearly modeled his attitude on Salt Bay himself. The manager had seen the incident and had done nothing. No problem, Damien asked. The manager shook his head, sipping a glass of sparkling water like champagne. He'll leave. Guys like that always do. Embarrassment hits later. Damien smirked. We'll keep his table warm for the next Instagram prints. But behind them, a different energy pulsed. A customer, older, sharp-eyed, seated alone near the kitchen, lowered his fork mid-bite. He leaned to the waitress and whispered, "That's Keanu Reeves, and your staff is making fools of themselves." The waitress nodded subtly, concern creasing her brow. Even the kitchen staff had paused behind the heat lamps. Line cooks exchanged glances, lips tightening. One of them muttered, "That's John Wick," and Damien just threw salt at him. Meanwhile, Keanu remained still. His hands rested on the table, fingers interlaced. His eyes slowly scanned the room, not with confrontation, but with awareness. Every detail was absorbed, every silence, every fake laugh, every glance. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was waiting. Then, as if the restaurant itself held its breath, the unmistakable chime of the kitchen service door echoed across the dining hall. Clang! It opened slowly. The hum of conversation dimmed. Even the music seemed to fade. A line cook peeked through and immediately stepped aside. Damien turned toward the kitchen, confused by the sudden silence. He saw the chef's whites, the dark glasses, the glint of a gold watch. The unmistakable swagger. Salt Bay had arrived, and he wasn't smiling. Damien's smirk vanished. The manager straightened so fast his glass nearly toppled. Across the room, Keanu shifted slightly in his seat. His eyes met Salt Bay's, and for the first time all night, he allowed himself a tiny smile. The curtain hadn't dropped yet, but the stage was set. The clatter of utensils stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the steady hum of the ventilation system seemed to quiet as Salt Bay stepped into the room. He moved slowly, deliberately, dressed in pristine white chef's attire, black gloves pulled tight around his hands, dark shades resting on the bridge of his nose like a crown of silent authority. On his wrist glinted a timepiece more expensive than most of the meals ever served here. In one hand he held a long chef's knife. In the other, a glistening gold-plated tomahawk steak, its juices still sizzling on the custom wood board. Every phone lifted, but Salt Bae didn't glance at the influencers or celebrities. He didn't nod to the manager, who now stood frozen beside the bar. And he didn't acknowledge Damien at all, who had gone stiff as marble, confusion and dread bleeding into his smirk. Salt Bae walked straight to table 14, to Keanu Reeves. The moment felt like a frame torn from a movie. Two men, one world famous for stoic vengeance, the other for flamboyant flair, now meeting in the middle of a battlefield lined with steak knives and pride. Salt Bae stopped beside the table, removed his sunglasses, and the crowd inhaled. Then he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that broke through the thick layer of tension like sunlight through smoke. "My brother," Salt Bae said, his accent rich, his voice low. Keanu stood. The two embraced like old friends reunited, not with fanfare, but familiarity. "You didn't tell me you were coming," Salt Bae said. "I didn't plan on staying long," Keanu replied, his tone dry. "But someone tried to make the evening interesting." Salt Bae turned slowly. His eyes landed on Damien. Dead silence. Damien's face drained of color. He took a step forward, hands half raised in confused defense. I didn't realize. You threw salt." Salt Bae interrupted, his voice suddenly cold. "At him." Damien blinked rapidly. "It was just a joke. I didn't know who he was." Salt Bae raised one hand. Damien stopped speaking mid-breath. He turned to the manager next. "You let this happen." The manager opened his mouth, but no words came. Salt Bae didn't wait. With one snap of his fingers, a senior server appeared. "Pull the kitchen feed. Project it now." Seconds later, all TVs across the restaurant, usually reserved for glamorous food promos, began playing back security footage. The entire sequence unfolded: Damien's mock sprinkle, the salt landing on Keanu's sleeve, the surrounding laughter. Gasps rippled across the room. Salt Bae's voice was ice. "You humiliated one of the most respected men alive, in my house." He turned to Damien, his voice rising just enough. "You don't work here anymore." Two security staff quietly moved from the bar. Damien backed up, sputtering. "Please, I didn't mean." "Go," Salt Bae said, "before you leave a worse taste than you already have." As Damien was escorted through the same golden doors Keanu had walked in earlier that night, the crowd stayed utterly silent. Because everyone now understood, respect wasn't about status. It was about knowing who you were talking to before it was too late. When the door slammed shut behind Damien, a slow murmur moved through the restaurant like a tide changing direction. The same people who had smirked, whispered, and filmed Keanu now stared with stunned faces, phones slowly lowering as the weight of what had just happened settled in. Salt Bae stood beside Keanu's table, adjusting his sleeves with quiet precision. The gold tomahawk steak still rested on the wooden board in his hand, its aroma now filling the room with richness and irony. "Forgive my staff," Salt Bae said, nodding slightly. "Sometimes people confuse uniforms for power." Keanu simply gave a small, respectful bow of his head. It's easy to forget that service is a form of dignity, not performance. Without another word, Salt Bae lifted the knife and began slicing the steak with masterful fluidity. The meat fell apart like silk, perfectly cooked, its juices shimmering under the warm lights. Every slice, every movement, was graceful, humble, intentional. The surrounding tables watched in silence, no longer amused, now reverent. Salt Bae plated the first cut himself and gently placed it before Keanu. "For those who walk in without needing to prove anything," he said. Keanu smiled faintly. "And for those who listen before judging." Across the room, the manager stood still, face pale, sweat beading at his collar. Salt Bae shot him a single glance. Nothing needed to be said. The man turned and vanished into the back, his future uncertain. The camera footage continued playing on the TVs, but no one laughed anymore. Instead, they watched their own reflections in the footage, saw how quickly they had judged, how eager they had been to pile on, how loud their silence had been when it mattered most. Keanu picked up his fork and took a single bite. Silence. Then a slow-building applause began. It started at a corner table, then spread to another, then another, not forced, not for show. It was a quiet ovation for grace under fire. Keanu didn't acknowledge it. He didn't need to. He was already focused on the stake in front of him. And the night once set to humiliate him had turned into something else entirely, a reminder that in a world obsessed with image, integrity always eats last and best. The clamor slowly faded into warm, reverent quiet. For the first time all night, the room didn't feel like a stage. It felt like a dining hall again, one with something real at its center. Keanu sat peacefully at table 14, cutting into the steak Salt Bae had served himself. No phones in his face now, no whispers behind his back, just silence and respect earned, not demanded. Salt Bae remained nearby, not hovering, just present. There was no show, no sprinkle, no theatrics. Just a man recognizing another, not for fame, but for composure. As the final bite disappeared, Keanu leaned back slightly, lifting the glass of wine that had quietly appeared during the applause, a deep burgundy vintage poured not for show, but as an apology. He raised it slightly toward Salt Bae and said, "Thank you for seeing what others didn't." Salt Bae gave a simple nod. Respect is the rarest ingredient, but once added, it changes everything. Moments later, Keanu stood, adjusting his worn cap. No photos, no farewells. He walked past the tables, the booths, the velvet rope, quietly acknowledged by eyes that now saw him clearly. When he stepped through the same doors he entered hours ago, the world outside looked no different. But everyone inside had changed. In a world obsessed with appearances, it's easy to forget that real worth doesn't need a price tag, and respect shouldn't require recognition. Keanu didn't demand status. He didn't fight to be seen. He let character speak, and it spoke louder than any gold-covered steak ever could. If you believe respect should be given freely, not based on money, looks, or fame, comment integrity below. And if you've ever been underestimated, share your story. Because sometimes, the quietest ones teach the loudest lessons.